So welcome everyone to our January 1st Monday. I'll be introducing Mike, who will be our primary presenter for the evening. So Mike, many of you know at this point from our various gatherings from Economic University to these Community Economy First Mondays. But just a bit about, so Mike works for a major tech company, works for Meetup, and then also has done a lot of work thinking about technology and human flourishing. And he also worked on the Team Human podcast on technology and human society. So he has a lot of experience thinking about these things. He also recently took up gardening. So I guess you're a burgeoning expert in that too. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to you, Mike.
Okay, cool. Well, I'm just grateful for this opportunity. I remember, I think it was maybe a year and a half ago when me and I first visited the Simone Weil house, and we already know each other, but we were just talking. And the first thing that I remember Bert and Emma just like latched onto was when I mentioned something technical, and that kind of like open spirit and open ear is kind of what further drew me in here. So I'm really grateful to get to share today. I'm going to share my screen now and get started. Okay. So just a little more context. Like Emma said, I work for a tech company, but I grew up reading tech magazines and internet stuff. I'm just really drawn to that for some reason. I didn't know why. And then in college, I got the opportunity to learn, oh, this is something actually to understand more, and was first heard the word a political economy, and understand there's more to understand to technology rather than just the output that's served to me.
You write about a contentious meeting you had with him.
Oh, but there's a story behind that technology too. I went to graduate school and kind of learned how technology models are expanding beyond just software and hardware into commoditizing the non-digital. But I work at one of these companies too, and so that gives me some interesting perspective. And so I want to just give a little context on what we're covering, because it's today, but it's also a month from now. This session will discuss ways that we engage with software economies and exploring how we can do that in a way that aligns with our shared values. So today we're trying to understand contemporary software economies in a vision of what better looks like. But then in February, we'll focus more on practicing these values. So today there's going to be lots of ideas, lots of context setting, but we'll really get more into practice next session, but lots of space to note questions throughout this presentation. To be more specific of what today we're doing, we're going to start by defining software and contemporary criticisms, just so we're all on the same page of what we're even talking about. We're going to call out what is the problem with the contemporary software economy that are most common. We'll explore this idea of free or freedom software, and then end with some examples. To kind of tease what could be ahead and get your mind going about what might be possible.
Mike, can I jump in just for one quick moment here?
Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to emphasize too that as I should have mentioned this at the start, but as Mike mentioned, our next first Monday for this community and economy group in February will also have Mike as the guest facilitator, and there we'll really focus on as Mike said, what you can do kind of in light of this information, both as individuals and also as communities. So we'll be recording this too. So if there's any folks in your household, parish community, any communities that you're part of who might also be interested in participating in that sort of a discernment, please, you can also share this recording with them later. So just to help you think both as an individual and as a community as you're listening to Mike's presentation here.
Cool. So in past sessions with this group, we've talked about topics like food, or medical care, and just general consumption. Unfortunately, I think the topic of software is less familiar, a bit more abstract to many of us. So I really want to go the extra mile to make sure that when we're having this conversation, we're aligned around what the subject of discussion even is. So when we say decommoditizing software, we're talking about computer application software. And when I say computer application software, I mean a computer program designed to carry out a specific purpose other than one relating to the operation of the computer itself. So this can be everything from Zoom that we're using right now. This runs on your computer. It can be the calculator that's on your phone. It's the thing that you access through the web, Facebook on web. Really any software that runs either on your machine or that you access in some way through a machine. being a little bit more specific. Again, applications you access your phone, you access on your laptop or desktop, or through any web connected device. So with this in mind of what we're talking about when we say computer application software, it's good also knowing, to segment this by different economic or revenue models that are most relevant today. This is going to be really relevant in this conversation. I'm going to walk through these and we'll note on them again later. But the first is purchase software. This is the idea of making a single expense, say $100 to purchase a copy of Microsoft Word. You pay that one-time fee and you download Word or you install Word onto your machine. And from that point forward, you can use Word in theory indefinitely because the software is owned by you on your machine. Another common example of that is video games. But this model, we're going to realize, is actually getting more and more sparse and rare. A much more prevalent model is subscription software. So this is software that you also pay money for, but you only have access to it as long as you're paying money for it. So just because you pay for Netflix one month doesn't mean you can have it the next month. Photoshop is an example of Adobe moved Photoshop from a model of purchase software over to subscription software. It's very popular to make that transition. Freemium software is similar to subscription software, but what it means is they're trying to kind of get you familiar with the software by offering a free version. So for Zoom, I think a lot of us know from the pandemic that you can use Zoom for free for, like, what is the constraint, 40 minutes. And then if you want to use more than 40 minutes, you have to pay money for it. Twitter is trying to move to a freemium model. They offer features that are only available if you pay money. Free software, when I have free in quotes here. And I think you all have heard this story probably before. I think these are mostly ad-supported software like Gmail, Instagram, YouTube. A lot of the things we use are free, but they have other revenue channels, mostly advertising. So you have access as a consumer or a user to access it, but you're making some sort of transaction there. And the last one is really going to be the thing we hark on a lot, is free dumb software, truly free software. We'll get into this more later, but just Firefox, VLC, Ubuntu, WordPress, some popular examples. No, I'm not touching on cryptocurrency or Web3 things in this conversation. Maybe you're especially curious about that. We can bring that up later if we want, but the operating models of those are just really continually evolving. I'm still forming opinions around it. It's really not worth making this conversation more complex than it needs to with that. Okay, so we have some sense of what we're talking about when we refer to software. Now I want to touch on some of the most popular arguments for why this software incites problems. The point of sharing this, I'm going to walk through this now, is to give some definition to those things you've heard through the news, things you've heard from other people, from your family, of why people have some sort of issue with this software that we're talking about. And I want to identify these to help differentiate what we're talking about from all of those. This is kind of fun. I had fun making this list, actually. They have my information, the government. They have my information, the corporation. They're interfering with democracy. They're propagating their own views, their own agenda. They're making us more extreme. They're making us dumber. They're damaging our emotional well-being, particularly youth. They're making us waste our time. Think of, like, people talk about autoplay on YouTube or Netflix. They're getting in the way of fair labor. This is hurting traditional taxi unions and automating the union. They're overworking creative people. This is creators on YouTube adapting their life and their schedule to the algorithm to get the maximum reach and the maximum revenue. They're hurting small businesses. They're automating away jobs. They're inspiring consumption through frequent advertising. So all this and more are messages communicated through media, and we're seeing a significant public response. Some call it the techlash. I think Cambridge Analytica really kicked this off, especially, and became it more a public thing. That's the first time I heard the term big tech used outside of weird niche communities. And every party, every political group seems to emphasize a different fault with the software, maybe some from these lists. And there's been some response, and again, I just want to acknowledge these things. You think of GDPR and CCPA, these are regulations that from the EU or from the state of California that limit the transaction of data and control and regulate that data. There's antitrust threats facing software distributors like Apple and Google's mobile app stores. There's antitrust threats facing companies like Amazon that use the data from their sales to design and sell their own competing products. There's threats to repeal Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act with the intention of placing greater responsibility or liability on tech companies for the information that's transacted within the software. So we reviewed this list of popular talking points and regulations, but these talking points and regulations are designed and communicated with the intention of maintaining a healthy economy and a protected consumer. That's a really important point. Everything we covered really is with the intention of maintaining the thing that's already existing in a market-centric context. So as radical as these regulations may be presented, they're making the assumption that software is a transaction between company and consumer. They're all designed to accommodate this assumption that it's a transaction between company and consumer. These regulations accommodate this existing software economy. The unspoken assumption is that corporations should mediate any and all things digital, including communications and relationships between people. This is a tacky graphic to kind of get that point across, is that this transaction between people, corporations, and software is going to continue to happen. You have these regulations that might kind of interfere here and there, but they're not asking the fundamental question. Now, obviously, this should sound familiar. The Industrial Revolution and mass production co-opted traditional craft and trade skills. And today, niche economies produce handmade furniture, handmade clothing, decor, etc. But these niche economies intentionally operate on a small scale and to a targeted audience. And they thrive in that way. They struggle, but they thrive. But this is not happening so much in the digital space to the same degree because of how easily software scales. For example, producing one pair of handmade shoes is a completely different operation than producing 1,000 pair of shoes. But in software, there's very little difference between the production of one good, and the production of 1,000 goods. When you create software, it's replicable, copyable, 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 and the default is always to scale, 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 and often treat it as a business opportunity. So I mentioned 5 popular models of software revenues for software, and I want to break them down a little further, this time into this concept of rented software and owned software. And we'll start to get into our main points. So by rented, what I mean is that this software is made available to the user, but at any time that access can end. The user is fully dependent on the organization to make the software available to them. This means that if Zoom preferred, they could shut down their server right now and we will no longer talk. We are paying them rent through a subscription fee to have access to the service that they provide to us. Whereas owned software is software in the possession of the individual. And so this is what we talked about before. Again, purchase software number 4 listed there is kind of going by the wayside. Not very relevant today. But 4 of these 5 models are very, like we saw, corporate consumer transactional relationship. So is there another way? Of course. That's what we're going to really get into, and this is actually where things get kind of fun. So to help understand what is free software, I'm going to tell a story. Let's start with this. My mom purchased a table from another person that had made use of the table. She painted the table to make it more fitting for her home. She fixed the tilt that the table had by adjusting the height of the legs. She used the table in her home to eat on, to have guests over. And a few years passed, she decided she didn't want the table anymore in her home, and she gave it, the modified table, to another person. Maybe she sold it, maybe she gave it. Does this sound strange? Not really. Now let's imagine this story in the context of software. My mom purchased a photo editing software from another person that had made use of it. She coded changes to the button icons and placements to make it work better for her. She fixed a bug in the software that prevented the software from saving her edits correctly. She used the software, the photo editing software, for a series of time. She decided she didn't want the software and sold the modified video software or gave it away to another person. Okay, so something kind of sounded strange in that second story. Purchasing used software from another person. Many of us have not had that transaction. Making adjustments to software that you own because you feel like it. Repairing software because it needs to be repaired. Distributing modified versions of software to others because that would be good upon the others. Why is this so strange? And this is really the fundamental question we're getting at in this conversation. So huge thank you to my wife Mina. She's on this call. She did these. You're going to see this presentation so butt ugly, but this is the one part that's actually decent looking. Think of handcrafted furniture and the transactions that happen there. You have a carpenter who gives an object to another person, and that person transacts money. That's an object that's usable and for a long time, and maybe that person gives it to another person. Maybe there's a financial transaction involved or not, and they can repeat and repeat. Repairs happen along the way, but that object can continue to be used by different people. Now then we have mass-produced furniture. Well, the quality here is a little bit different. The person might get it from IKEA, and that might be, in most cases, that's the end of the story. It goes into the dumpster. Now, where does this connect into what we're talking about? Let's take the model we talked about of purchase software. Here, an example is a video game. Today with video games, you pay money on the console, you download the video game, but you can't gift that video game to anybody else. You can't really, because it's assigned to you as the buyer. So you purchase the software, it's just a transaction solely between you and Nintendo. You own it, but you're not really fully in control of it still. Okay, here's where things get really scary. Rented software. This is the different models that we talked about, where you access it. You're actually never even owning or possessing the software. You are going to the software, you are entering the software, you are accessing the software, but you are in their land, their space. You are sharing your money. We don't have to pay for the service. You are sharing your information about yourself, but you are within their control. Any moment they could close the door, they could kick you out. It's on their clock. And free software, which we're really going to start to look at, is a little picture of that. It's a bit more complex. Think of it as a community garden. You can show up and there's usually an area where it says, free goods, and you can pick it yourself and you can walk away. You can go and you can contribute your labor and give your labor to it to make it better. You can go and you can pick up seeds, and you can take those seeds and take it to your own home. You can meet other people in that space and transact with them, monetarily or non-monetarily. But it's an open space where these exchanges happen. So when we say free, and what do we actually mean? We mean free as in freedom, not free as in free food. Richard Stallman is the longtime leader and advocate of freedom software, or free software. He's the founder and leader of the Free Software Foundation and a significant voice of free software through the last 40 years. I'm going to share a video that gives a glimpse of his vision of shared software over owned software. I'm a little concerned that the audio is not going to come through. I'm going to just reshare this. Yeah, it wasn't going to come through. Just a moment. Okay, hopefully this works.
I don't think it's a social imperative to give them the most possible profit. I think the social imperative is that information that's developed should be accessible to everyone as freely as possible. If we look at the principle underlying the incentive principle, give people incentives to do the things that you wish to encourage. And then we say, what are we giving people incentives for? We see that we're not giving them any incentive to do the thing that benefits society most. If a person has a choice, he can write a program and then encourage everyone to use it in any way that's good for him. Or he can write the program and then market it, hoarding the plans, telling people they're not allowed to share with their neighbors, being very obnoxious and obstructive. We see he has an incentive to be obnoxious and obstructive. He doesn't have an incentive to cooperate. I think that's sick. I think that's a bad social organization, because we're encouraging most what's not good for us. A hacker is a person who does hacking. What hacking is having the attitude of playful cleverness. Doesn't matter just what you're doing. You could be writing computer programs, writing music, sneaking around on the roof of a building where the authorities say people aren't supposed to go, or sneaking around abandoned subway tunnels, or writing a book. You could be playing a peculiar joke on people. Almost anything you could do, if you do it with a spirit of playful cleverness and with intense, joyous commitment, is hacking. If I'm offered a chance to use a piece of software, provided I would agree not to share it with anyone, I feel that it would be wrong and it would spiritually hurt me to agree. So I don't want them investing in software that's owned. And I don't believe that anything is justified to encourage them to invest in software that's owned. I think the really great software has been done by hackers who were doing it because they loved it, because it was playful cleverness. And that will continue in any case. I think there are alternative ways of arranging for some amount of money to go into paying salaries of people, paying them to spend their time writing programs. If people want certain kinds of programs to be written, they can come up with other forms of organization. I can suggest a few, but the important thing is there are lots of alternative ways of doing things. This one has been chosen because it gets the people investing in software companies the most profits of any of the available ways.
Okay. Can you all hear me? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, great. Okay. I was told that it wasn't working. Okay. So what we heard, our environment incentivizes the development of proprietary owned software. It does not incentivize sharing between people. Good software comes from hacking, and hacking means a voluntary, playful cleverness. And he sees it as his responsibility to share software, not engage with software that is owned. So there's a clear definition of what free software is. Free software has these 4 essential freedoms: the freedom to run the program, the piece of software as you, for any purpose, the freedom to study how the program works and change it so it does your computing as you wish. This includes access to the source code that makes the software possible. The freedom to redistribute copies of the software that you received.
Just lost.
I'll go to the next room and let him know that we lost him.
Thanks, Mina.
So are we still in the internet?
Yeah. Mina, those were really good drawings. Were those yours?
Yeah, I drew them today too, because he had this like really hideous, hard to understand clip art, and I needed to make that point more clear. So I just
Yeah.
helped
It
him
was
out a little
wonderful.
bit.
Yeah.
He just told me that he's joining. Rejoining.
Okay,
Cool.
great.
Great. We'll let him in.
To the Google Palace. No, yes, to the Internet Garden.
That's why you don't steal.
Hey,
Hi, Mike.
thank you, Mia. Okay, I'm not sure where I left off, but let me share this.
You were giving us the 4 qualities of free software, according to this
cool.
person. And
Yeah,
I think
and-
you were at number 3, I think.
Oh, okay. Weird. I wonder what happened. Okay. So yeah, the freedom to redistribute copies. So again, you can take the code, you can modify it if you want, and then you can redistribute that to others. But you can also take the code, modify it, and redistribute your modification of it. So at this point, you might say, well, I know how to fix a crack in a table, but I don't know how to modify the code of software. And that's why I don't think of these things very much. I understand what you're saying. But there's a reason more of us don't code. It's not just a skill that we're in today's economy. It's not a skill that we're able to apply in a practical way. The idea of coding is seen oftentimes as an economic goal towards a certain financial status or income. If we want to build a better version of our photo editing software, we're asked to start from scratch today. It really incites this entrepreneurial perspective rather than this personal or community goal. So it's not coding is not a practical skill, and unless you really desire for it to be entrepreneurial or professional, and that's just a result of the constraints that we have in part. So with free software, also software is not necessarily a commodity in and of itself. Rather, software is a shared good. Of course, people need to be compensated for the work that they're doing, and there's lots of models to do that. We'll explore some of that later on. But this vision of software enables the ownership and alterability that we're accustomed to outside of the digital world, but we're not accustomed to within the digital world. So just imagine what this makes possible. Imagine software designed for and by communities, taking versions of other software and modifying it that's relevant for locally. The software that expresses a community, software that belongs to a community. Different communities supporting each other and collaborating, but still having autonomy to make the software for them. And the localization of money flow by instead of compensating people just for the production and distribution of global software, rather rewarding people financially for the administration and distribution of local software. So what did we cover? We covered a consumer-corporate relationship is commonly assumed for software, even amongst anti-tech sentiment. But software development and use can be community-oriented if we see software as shared information rather than a locked commodity. So I'm just going to spend just 5 to 10 minutes looking through just a few examples, and we'll open it up just to give a picture of what this actually might look like or might feel like. And then we'll wrap up. Okay, this is kind of not the best photo, but it's Firefox. You probably all know Mozilla Firefox. Mozilla is interesting. It's a hybrid organization. It's a 501c3 and also a corporation. The corporation is owned by the foundation. And their goal, they say, is to ensure the internet is a global public resource, open and accessible to all. The way that they make money is the corporation has an agreement with a search engine. In this case, I think it's like Yahoo. And Yahoo pays them a lot of money to be the default search engine when you install Firefox. That's probably 90% of their revenue. And they're able to use that money for the development of Firefox, but also a lot of other good things towards their goal, towards their mission. The license on this is technically free software. Anyone can take Firefox. They can download the source code and they can run it. Of course, they can change it. They can alter it. One of the most popular alterations of Firefox is the Tor browser, which is a super secure browser that's used for certain safety reasons. They have, I think, probably 100 or 200 employees, but they're really asking. They have lots of thousands of volunteers who translate this, who contribute to make the code better, faster, stronger, and provide support to others. It's literally a website. You can see how to contribute, and they really go the extra mile to make it possible for anybody to contribute the code. This is an example of them with their mission. That is kind of random, but they funded an organization that did a pop-up shop in New York City that I got to volunteer in years ago, that was helping just communicate and educate people in the area about the value of free software and a kind of protesting a certain other economic models. And so that's part of what they do, is this awareness outside of just their business goals. Another example you probably haven't heard of is Nextcloud. I'll get into what they actually are, but they're a German company, limited liability LLC. They're not a nonprofit. They use the general public license, which adheres to those 4 values that we talked through before. And they have around 40-50 employees. They're competitive with 2 of the biggest companies of Microsoft and Google. And anyone, again, can access the code, they can modify it, they can change it, they can contribute improvements to it. And even though the software is free, the revenue, the way they keep the business going, is providing technical assistance to major clients, a lot of government entities and large corporations, mostly German corporations. I'll give you a little bit of context again of what this is, because I think you understand what Firefox is, but just to get a picture of what's possible with free software. On the left, this is Google servers. This is what you are accessing when you log into Gmail. When you go to Google, you are communicating with this big machine somewhere in the country, miles and miles away, and the machine communicates back to you. On the right, this is my little server in Meet and I's home. This is what we use to do our docs, to do our calendar, to do our contacts, to do our notes, etc. Instead of communicating all the way to a server, we communicate right to a little machine in our living room that we can also access anywhere in the world, just like you can access Google anywhere in the world. And so you have this little machine, you install Nextcloud on it, and it makes possible, this is what I do when I log on to Nextcloud, I see a nice home screen with a little overview. This is my calendar, I manage my calendar. Looks like Google Calendar, but it's not, it's run on my little machine. Again, this is what free software can look like. I stream my music when I'm at work, wherever I'm at, I can play it through my mobile device. I can send a poll, find a good time to talk with friends, all run locally, open source software on my machine, free software on my machine, manage photos. Anybody can contribute to this. Is their website where they say, hey, if you want to help with the design, this, please, this is literally the chat conversation that you can have with the designers at that company to contribute and be a part of that. Not just to receive, but also to give. Again, think of the garden, the community garden. You can receive, but you can also give. This is what they use to manage their engineering of it. Any engineer can hop on and contribute to the coding to make it better for everybody. So that's a taste of what's possible with free software. Okay, so today we looked at, again, the contemporary software economies and a picture of a better way. We ended with kind of a little bit cliffhanger, hopefully kind of got you interested in some way. But then next time we really want to dig into what does it look like to practice these values in our lives. So I'm just leaving with this question, and I hope you can all kind of think about this over the next bit. What software is most fundamental to your livelihood, to your day, to your maybe to your family? Ask yourself, is it free? Maybe you don't know the answer to that. That's okay. But if it's not, or if you're not sure, imagine a better way of what that could be. And I'm going to share something in the Zoom chat or maybe over email also. I want to kind of collect some people's reflections on this so that we can really make the best use of our time together next month and explore what those other options could be. So with that, I'll close out. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Mike. Well, yeah, it's only 38 after, so hopefully we could have some discussion around what Mike presented. Yeah, any questions for Mike or what you want to get into discussion about?
Yeah, I have a quick question, Mike. This is Megan. When you were talking about that server that you use, I think I might have missed, like, what do you use for internet? And by having your own server, do you then get away from like the advertisements and those other aspects that like corporations would use to try to make it a non-free service? And I might not be able to understand all the technical stuff appropriately either.
Yeah. So what Google is a big hunk of servers somewhere, and they take a lot of energy. They cost a lot of money to maintain them and to pay engineers to maintain them, and they need to make money off of that. So what they do is they give you advertisements, or they ask you to compensate them with money through a storage fee. And so we give them advertising dollars, and we give them money. That is one way. Another way is asking the question, what does Google serve for me? What value do I get from them? Say Google Drive or Google Docs, etc. What value do I get from that? And is it possible for me, instead of defaulting to needing their services, can I provide those services in my community, through my home, through a neighborhood shared server? And what I shared is an example of providing that locally. So instead of relying on that large organization, it can be done locally. Now you need, just like Google has big servers, you do need a server, but you don't need a big server. All I have, my server is the size of an Altoids canister. It costs $35, and that provides me the benefits of Google Calendar, Google Drive, etc. And it's very accessible. It's increasingly accessible to set that up. I hope that answers to some degree, but feel free to clarify.
Yeah, no, that helps for sure. So if every American, let's say, for example, got one of these individual at-home servers, would the energy equate to the same as those Google servers?
That's a really good question.
Okay.
I've heard people say that to run the server that we have in our home, it costs around $10 a year. I think that's cheaper, because part of what you're doing is a lot of what Google's operation expenses are not to serve you the data, but also other things like advertising and a lot of other operational services that aren't necessary with a slimmed down service like you can run locally in your home. So yes, I believe that. I can't but I definitely think it would work out to be much less energy use.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. And then sorry, one last question. Were you saying that Firefox, I think that was the example you're using, that they don't do advertisements if you use Firefox, or how does that kind of work when you're using a search engine is what I'm curious about.
Oh, right. Yeah, sure. So what I was referring to is Firefox as the browser, so the software. So I wasn't referring yet to the services that you access. That's the websites you access through the browser. And so, no, that's a different question of how do you not get advertisements, and it's a whole nother conversation. But I don't have a solution for that right now. Unless
May
someone
I?
wants to share in chat.
I'd like to say something. My name is Brad. I work for Mozilla. I work on Firefox. And I was lurking in your presentation because I was preparing a meal. Sorry about that. I think your core ideas here are very well presented, and I'm delighted to see them being shared. And let me be careful here that I want to put two ideas in your head. One is that I'm not trying to be an official spokesperson for Mozilla in anything I say. And the other thing is that I hope I don't come off as like a shill. But one of the ways that Mozilla makes money from Firefox is through the search bar. So if you've ever typed directly into a search bar, like, cat sweater, whatever, as opposed to first navigating to your preferred search site, then that search is going to be quote credited to the company that made the browser, which, if you're using Firefox, Mozilla gets a tiny little bit of money from the search vendor where that search goes, because it was typed into that bar at the top. Whereas if you navigate manually to google.com and type in a search that way, I'm not sure if Mozilla gets a cut of that at all. Maybe we do, I'm not sure. But the point is, it's a very small amount of money spread out over the many millions of users doing things on the internet. So Mozilla for sure is a company, I get paid. So that's all correct. And it is a little bit unfortunate that Mozilla, for its mission of trying to make the internet work for people, make you successful when you get on the internet, you actually do what you're trying to accomplish without giving away information about yourself or giving away, your privacy or your security or your mental well-being even. It's unfortunate that given all that, we still don't have a good way to fund a project, because I have to get paid. The machines that host the Mozilla content have to be run. So the internet really does run on advertising. It's unfortunate. Mozilla does not, using Firefox does not opt you out of that model. It's maybe just a question of where's your money going. And the Mozilla mission statement is very user empowerment focused. If that makes a difference to you, I think that's great, but we're still just a company.
Thank you, Brett. David?
Hi, I'm sorry I joined late. I just wanted to comment on the local server idea, and to just say it doesn't necessarily have to be in your home. My son and his friends have a server that they use, so it was about 8 roommates in Corvallis who all went to OSU, and their friends are all using the same server. It might be bigger than Mike's, but it's, not that big. And like I can easily, so if you have a community, it just needs to be the community's server. So thanks.
Yeah, Angela.
Hi, I'm just making dinner too. I'm curious about the digital divide. One of my son's friends, James, his great grandmother is awesome, but she is 83 and she just doesn't use the internet. And she's awesome. And I wanted to give her access to take her to Multnomah County Library. And I just wonder, has anybody done anything to say, hey, why don't we tax these companies or something to provide access to the economy or just to be a parent? I mean, she's essentially doing the parenting I'm doing, but she's doing it by pieces of paper and conversations by calling her principal or the assistant. And it's not as easy for her. I don't know, maybe this is the wrong part of the conversation, but I just wanted to bring it up.
No, I'm glad you raised this because at one point I worked for an organization that its goal was to, bridge the digital divide. And where did our funding come from? Our funding came from the corporations. That came from Google. Now there was one thing with that funding. They gave us, $500,000. But what do you think we were teaching them? We were teaching them to consume. And that's where I get hung up on what the digital divide is. The digital divide is teaching people to consume goods that are being standardized as necessities to live in our world. And that's incredibly misleading. This even impacts things like STEM education. I think it's great, like Decode and stuff. But these are things that are motivated to support a certain way of working and professional life, and an attitude not towards a necessarily a fruitful life, but how to consume or work in the way that's being asked of us. Yeah, I'm hung up on this question that I think you're kind of hinting at of certain elders, where the advantage of this not free software is that it's designed to accommodate people who are vulnerable, and so how do you balance that of providing them access in a world that increasingly requires that, while also supporting them towards a better more equitable world. So I know I did not answer your question, but I more commented on the situation. But I hope that's okay for now, if anyone else wants to contribute. But
thank you. I know it's not that easy. And I think even our teenagers aren't questioning the internet, they're just using it. So how do we actually criticize this thing that we're been totally hung up on? I mean, we don't have the same kind of communication we can have face to face. So thank you.
Yeah, Malcolm.
Yeah, thanks. It was a great presentation, very interesting. And before I ask my question, just a note to the energy use of a home server. I've seen a thing where someone runs their own server for their own website. They actually host a fairly popular website and are trying to run it off their own home server, powered by a solar panel on their roof. So it's possible. And then when there's enough sun, their website just crashes, and they design it that way, which is kind of cool, I think. But my question, I guess, is kind of a philosophic one, actually kind of two related philosophic questions. One is that I realize that any tool changes a human being. a human being with a hammer is different from a human being without. A human being with an automobile is different from one without. But you're talking about these companies that are controlling the software we use. And one of my concerns is that when I use software, more than any other tool, the tool itself seems to be controlling my brain to an extent that I dislike, more so than my other tools in daily life. And I'm wondering if you think that these free software also are more or less equally able to control the human brain themselves. And the other thing is that all software, of course, runs on hardware. And is hardware able to become truly free? And I say this like our family, my dad built a computer, but he did it by just buying a bunch of parts and plugging them together, everything from fans to hard drives. So it's possible, perfectly possible for not very skilled people to build a computer, but it seems, at least so I've heard, almost impossible to build the components. So how do these two things work together? Are these problems that can be bridged by free software, or are they problems that are more fundamental and can't be solved through free software?
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts that I'm going to have a hard time keeping them together, but I think I'll first respond to the hardware thing. You probably have heard of Fairphone. Fairphone is a I don't know, a Dutch or some European company that attempts to make a smartphone with all components that are think of fair trade, and they admit that their phone has not met their own requirements. They do their best, but they have not done that. So yeah, like when I'm presenting this and we're talking about this, there's this implied assumption that I'm making that the world needs and fundamentally needs this hardware and software to thrive and to be right. And I understand that assumption, but that's actually not what I'm making. I think that is a conversation that I'd love to have over beer with some time. But this really is about like navigating the world that we're in. So yeah, I think it's mostly a response to a very not healthy place that we're in. I'm trying to remember now the first part. Would you summarize the first part again? The first question.
Yeah. So I guess like by the way, I entirely agree with everything you've presented so far, and I'm interested to see it develop. But I'm wondering myself, as well as like the control over corporations, it seems that these particular kinds of tools have a control over our brains. In your experience with the more free versions, do they have any less of that controlling effect over the human being? Do they put the human being more in charge of the tool itself?
Yeah. So I guess two things here is with free software, you're always in control. You can always adjust it. You can always alter it. And that's not just if you know how to code, but it's actually that philosophy is built into the software itself, and that it's often is modifiable and customizable to a level that's not. Now, I work at a company that creates software that is not free, and my title is product manager. There's no such thing as product managers in free software for the most part. They're referred, well, unless you work at a large organization, maybe Mozilla has product managers, but among communities, you would refer them as project managers, because you are facilitating a project, a group of people that are working towards something. The focus is on the objective that's serving the user that's using it, not selling a commodity or creating or forming a commodity. So that philosophy definitely is deep in these communities and the way they work. I think there's definitely, I think free software has been co-opted by what's called the open source movement. It's become fashionable for companies like Google to say that they contribute open source code when it's really kind of a justification and a push off from other kind of legal threats. That's another conversation. But yeah, I'm optimistic, Malcolm, that there's a lot more, again, a sense of ownership. You can just like the sense of ownership and control, and even having access to the community that makes the software. The software is represented better by people than just an object, and I imagine that also impacts the way we see it.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
Catherine was gonna say something, then I want to say.
Please.
Oh yeah, so I was really fascinated by David's example of your son and like 8 roommates sharing a server. So I'm just wondering what practical issues would come up with group probably a bit larger than 10 trying to have their own servers in one place and sharing it. I mean, the example I thought of is one person hogging all the server space. I mean, is this something real? Or yeah, if you could just point to those practical issues, that'd be awesome. Do you have something?
Yeah, well, I had another question, so maybe after he answers yours, I wanted to add something. Yeah.
And did you want Mike to answer that or me from my son's experience?
Oh, I didn't even think about that, David. I'd love to hear from you too, I guess. Both you and
You know, their server might be quite a bit bigger, because when I say they're friends, they're like in real life friends, as well as I think a lot of their people they know only over the internet. The only issue, I mean, it is like the solar power example. If that server crashes, it's down. And whereas with Google, I think they repair it probably faster than when somebody is in the house has to go fix it. But there was a point where somebody was downloading so much stuff that it was slowing. I mean, it was just somebody in the house and they just had to get more bandwidth, I think was the solution. So, yeah.
I think what's cool about that example, David, is like with that, like with a company, with a large organization, they see someone using bandwidth and there's an automated constraint that's put on that says, now we put this limit. And what David's describing is 8 people or 10 people or whatever needing to have some sort of conversation, consultation to each other about how they, as a community manage their shared resource. And that's, again, this kind of like reorienting around the people, using a shared resource rather than just this transaction with an organization.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, I had a question. Yeah, well, 2 parts. One, just using the material that you brought up here, like what I think would be helpful to know what's kind of the relationship between the server you have and the software examples that you laid, especially at the end, like for your personal life, how important is the server for using the types of free as in freedom software that you use? And then second part of that question would be, I mean, imagine people in this call and certainly in this community, like we're going to be taking this very seriously, and like we want to adapt some of this stuff. So we want to help us to think about what the barriers to adaptation are for people who aren't just like the true believers, like, okay, let's all just jump in. Like, what if what do you imagine, just from your own experience and that of your friends, of being barriers to adopting some of the the free versions that you walked us through at the end there?
Yeah, I think I'm gonna first like I think with example of the server, not all free software requires a server, but in things like what I described, Nextcloud, that runs on a server, you probably the convenience of me is that I'm really the only person who accesses it. And so if I'm away and it goes down for some reason, I'm not responsible to anyone else to make sure that it's right. And so I think that would be a big part of when you have a shared resource is then how do we what do we do in these scenarios? Who's responsible for what? What are permissions of who's able to modify or alter? And these are things that come through just through conversation and probably should be written down together on some sort of shared, document that everyone kind of agrees to. But it would take some time. It would probably maybe, every week you could have a thing where, someone is the point person to doing any repairs or fixes. Doesn't mean necessarily are the ones to solve all the problems, but they're the ones who take responsibility to initiate solutions with the support of others. That would be an example of what might be necessary. Because if you have it all fall on one person, the tech person, that's not sustainable. I think it also takes a certain patience. Like I said, software today is designed to maximize kind of consumption, and there's lots of tricks to make things really pretty and beautiful and colorful, and just like emotionally compelling, that you're not going to get in the same way from some free software, because that's not where the time is being spent. It's being spent towards making a functional service, not a super compelling or emotionally compelling service. So that means adapting your expectations to the screen not being as bright and the colors not being as vivid, and learning that maybe that's actually in our best interest to not be so emotionally triggered by this stuff. But that is a change, probably for lots of people.
Mm-hmm.
And I just think that could be much better happen through a support community of people trying things together.
Well, we're at time, so I wonder if we should go ahead and wrap up there.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I see you got a question, but hopefully we could be, I mean, let's maybe, you know how to be in touch with Mike and us electronically. So Mike, I don't know how you want to end things. Certainly looking forward to February 6th. But one thing I want to say is that people, anyone who's, please send an email to Simone Bayhouse and Mike and like a group if you have that people here, in regard to conversations that you want to pursue in the meantime, maybe to benefit more from Mike's next presentation, and questions maybe you would have for him that would help you to think about what you want to take practically to that conversation. Or Mike, what else would you set up that?
And if you want to give it a try, I shared a link in the Zoom chat, and if you click that link, it will open up a page on my server, and it will explain what to do. But I want people to write and share some of the software, and really answering that last question of what is that software that's most fundamental to your life. You can contribute some of those things in that link, and then that will be a resource for me to build off of next time. And when you click that link, you'll get to see what it's like to load a little Altoid CAN server and meet a nice home.
Great. And I also want to thank Brad. Thank you for giving the perspective of someone on the inside of one of these. And it seems like something else to think about is how a community or communities can incentivize the type of provision that we want to exist in terms of doing the deeper and harder work for this stuff. And we're an economic, we get to talk about economics, so that's a welcome discussion too.
I'm sorry, one last thing. I realized if there was other questions, I'm just going to share my email address too. If anybody, I'm happy to respond if anybody has anything, or if I can help.
Great. I think should we leave it at that?
Yeah, I think so. Thank you again, Mike, for your time. That was wonderful. And also, as Bert said, if anyone wants to get in touch, especially to get the link for next week, maybe isn't on our listserv, please send an email to the Simone Bayhouse Gmail I put in the chat, and we'll make sure to get you the invite for our next month.
Yeah, and we'll share the link that Mike shared more probably too. Yeah. Okay,
Awesome.
great.
Take care.
Thank you so much, Mike.
Thank you all.
Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
So I'm not sure, is the point of all this to save?
Oh,